He didn't even look at me when he said it. I was standing by the kitchen island, pouring him the exact brand of green tea he liked. Imported, expensive, and absolutely not the kind I would have bought for myself. I placed the cup in front of him gently, as I'd done countless times before, and he barely acknowledged me. Thanks, he muttered, still scrolling through his phone. Then, chuckling at something my daughter said, he added, "You spoil me too much, Grace. You're like our personal live-in maid." I laughed awkwardly. I thought maybe he was joking. But then he said it again. "No, seriously," he said with that smirk that never reached his eyes. "You're the perfect little servant. Quiet, predictable, and always around when we need something." I stood still for a moment, holding the teapot. The handle had begun to warm in my hand. My daughter, Heather, was sitting on the couch, feet tucked under her like a teenager, not even glancing at me. I cleared my throat and tried to keep my voice light. "That's not funny, Mason." "Oh, come on," he said, waving a hand. "It's a compliment. You're just very helpful, useful." But then he paused, looked right at me with that smug little tilt of his head, and added one more phrase, one that would replay in my mind for days. "Though I suppose that's all you've ever really been, huh? A useless servant." He said it like it was an old joke between friends, like I should have been used to it, like I hadn't raised a daughter on my own after being widowed too young, like I hadn't worked 2 jobs and taken in Heather and her new husband when they hit a rough patch, like I didn't sign for the mortgage because their credit was shot. I stood in silence. Heather didn't look up. I walked to the sink and rinsed the pot out with cool water. I remember the sound of the water swirling down the drain. Funny, the things you remember when your dignity is circling that same drain. Later that evening, I mentioned it to Heather. Just the once. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly. "Mason made a comment earlier that hurt my feelings." She didn't even blink. "He jokes a lot, Mom. Don't take it personally." Then she got up and closed the bedroom door behind her, and I stood in the hallway, holding my breath like maybe that would stop my heart from sinking. It didn't. Over the next few days, it got worse. Little jabs here and there. A comment about how I folded laundry like someone who learned in the 1950s. A laugh at my expense when I couldn't figure out the new dishwasher settings. Once, I overheard him tell Heather, "Your mom's sweet, but she's basically just furniture at this point. Can we talk about getting more space?" That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being used. I was being erased. I started noticing things disappearing. My ceramic vase, the one I bought in Venice during a rare vacation, was now in their bedroom. My favorite armchair was replaced with something modern. The entire pantry had been reorganized, and I no longer recognized the labels. Everything was oat milk and flaxseed and imported crackers that tasted like cardboard. And then there were the guest lists. Family dinners that I'd usually host, Heather would send out invites, but not include me. It was as if I was being slowly faded out of my own life. But I didn't cry. I didn't confront. I just observed. And while they saw a quiet, compliant old woman still refilling their coffee mugs and scrubbing the stove, what they didn't see was the envelope I pulled from the lockbox in my closet. The deed. The deed that still had only one name on it. Mine. They thought they owned the house because they occupied it. But occupying and owning are two very different things. That night, as they laughed from the living room, I sat in the dark in the guest room, the one they gently nudged me into while they needed space. I opened a notebook, clicked my pen, and started writing a list. Every comment, every insult, every manipulation. Not for revenge, for clarity. I needed to see it on paper, to stop gaslighting myself, to stop pretending this was temporary or accidental. Because the truth was, I wasn't a servant. I was a woman who had forgotten how much power she still had. And soon enough, they were going to remember. The next morning, Heather barely acknowledged me as she floated through the kitchen, her Bluetooth earbuds in, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She was on a video call with someone from her online yoga group, laughing in that sugary tone I hadn't heard since high school, the one she used when she wanted something. I reached past her to grab the cereal, my cereal, tucked now behind boxes of grain-free granola and freeze-dried kale chips. Mason was already parked on the couch, legs splayed like he owned the place, flipping channels as if he'd been born with a remote in his hand. He barely glanced up. You should really stop buying the sugary stuff, Grace, he said, not taking his eyes off the TV. It's not good for your age. That was the second time he said something like that. The first was subtle. The third would come over dinner. I didn't reply. I just poured the cereal, grabbed a banana, and walked back to the guest room. My room now, apparently. They'd even swapped the door lock. Mason said it was just a security update, but I noticed they didn't change theirs. By the end of the week, I was eating alone most nights. They had new routines, vegan meal kits, group movie nights, private time. I was left with the leftovers and the increasingly loud hum of the refrigerator, which had somehow become my most consistent companion. That Saturday, I heard Heather laughing through the wall. She keeps her tax documents in a shoebox, she said. Like, what is this, 1983? I swear, Mason, sometimes I think she's waiting for the Pony Express to deliver her pension. I should have left the house that moment, but I didn't, because I realized something else. They weren't just rude. They weren't just entitled. They were confident I'd never do anything about it. That night, I pulled the shoebox down from the closet shelf, yes, that shoebox, and took out the original mortgage agreement. Heather's signature was nowhere on it. She and Mason had never made a single payment. In fact, the only reason their names were attached to the utilities was because I let them sign up when their credit disqualified them from getting service elsewhere. Let that sink in. I wasn't just the homeowner. I was the lender, the backbone, the invisible scaffolding that had been holding up their world. And they treated me like insulation, silent, hidden, taken for granted. That Sunday, Mason crossed the line for the third time. I was outside watering the flowers, my garden, which I had lovingly built over 15 years, when Mason came out in his robe, holding his mug, and said with mock confusion, "You're still out here? I thought the help clocked out at 5. He laughed, alone. I turned off the hose, wiped my hands on my pants, and said nothing. I walked past him, back inside, up the stairs. And then I shut the door, not just on him, but on who I had allowed myself to become around him. The next day, while they were at one of their endless brunches, I drove to see my attorney, Tom. Tom had been my husband's friend before he passed. He'd helped me with the will, the insurance, the estate. He knew me. More importantly, he knew my limits. So, when I showed up at his office without an appointment, he raised an eyebrow. "You all right, Grace? I need to transfer a deed, and I need to do it quietly." I explained everything. The insults, the isolation, the feeling of being a ghost in my own house. I didn't cry. I didn't vent. I just laid out the facts like a well-prepared witness. Tom listened, then he nodded, leaned back in his chair, and said the magic words. "You've got every legal right to remove them. And frankly, it might be therapeutic." We filed the paperwork that day, reclassifying the house under an irrevocable trust, locking out anyone not listed. Guess who wasn't listed? I drove home feeling taller than I had in years. That evening, Mason asked if I could take his suit to the dry cleaner. I said no, just that. No explanation. He blinked like he didn't understand the word. I repeated it. "No, Mason, I won't be doing that anymore." Heather came down the stairs, furrowing her brow. "Mom, are you okay?" I looked at her with a calm I didn't know I had. "I'm fine. I'm just done." Then I went to my room, pulled out the deed copy, and placed it gently into a bright red folder, just in case I needed to remind them whose roof they were mocking me under. I kept the red folder tucked neatly into the drawer of my nightstand, right underneath my reading glasses, 2 sticks of gum, and a handwritten note from my late husband that read, "Don't let anyone dull your sharp edges. Ever." That Monday, Heather came home with a vision board. I wish I were joking. She rolled it out on the dining table like she was unveiling a Picasso, and Mason stood behind her, arms crossed, nodding like some kind of motivational speaker. "Mom?" Heather beamed. "We've been thinking. Maybe it's time we started making the place more us, like really create a shared vision. Something modern, minimalist, chic." I looked at the board, photos cut from magazines, marble countertops, Edison light fixtures, some art installation that looked like a tangled coat hanger. I didn't see a single picture of anything remotely warm, familiar, or mine. And in the middle, a giant red sticker that read, "Our space, our rules." That's when it hit me. They weren't trying to make a home. They were staging a takeover. Heather kept talking, something about knocking out a wall and painting over the dated yellow in the kitchen. Mason chimed in. And we were thinking maybe your room could become like a little den for guests, or maybe a podcast space. I blinked. My room? He grinned. Yeah, I mean, you're barely in there anyway. My fingers curled under the table. I took a deep breath. I'll think about it. Heather clapped. Yay, see? We're co-creating now. No, Heather, you're stealing, politely. That night, I opened Zillow. I didn't look for a new place for me. I listed the house, discreetly, private sale. No photos, serious buyers only. By Wednesday, I had 3 interested parties. By Friday, one had already driven past and said, "The neighborhood is lovely. I can tell the house has history." Oh, it did. History and the ghosts of my patients. I arranged for the private showing on Sunday morning when I knew they'd be out doing their yoga brunch doubleheader. Tom handled the legal side quietly, as promised. He even gave me a little smile and said, "It's rare to see someone pull off a graceful coup, but you might just manage it." I liked that word. Coup. Felt better than servant, didn't it? Sunday came. I brewed fresh coffee, opened the windows, and lit one of those overpriced candles Heather hoarded like she was planning for a blackout. The couple arrived right on time, a young pair, expecting their first child, eyes wide with hope and plans. I walked them through the house as if I were the realtor myself. "This was my daughter's room," I said, gesturing. "She painted that wall herself, wanted it purple. It stayed that way until her husband convinced her gray was more mature." They chuckled politely. I led them to the master bedroom. "This is where I used to sleep. Lovely light in the mornings, until the guests made themselves permanent." The woman tilted her head. "Guests? Oh, don't worry," I said with a smile. "They're just squatters, but they'll be gone by closing." The couple laughed, though I don't think they fully understood I wasn't joking. We signed the preliminary offer that evening. When Heather and Mason returned, sun-kissed and smug, I was on the porch sipping tea. "Mom, you moved my candle," she asked. "Needed it for ambiance," I replied. "Ambiance for what?" A tour Mason raised an eyebrow. "Tour of what?" I looked at them both. "My house." Heather laughed. "Okay, what's the joke?" I didn't smile, and that's when she knew. I watched the color drain from her face. Mason's jaw tightened, but I didn't wait for them to process it. I stood, smoothed my sweater, and said, "You've got 30 days, or less if you keep calling me names." Then I walked inside and closed the door behind me. Locked it, too. That night, I slept in the master bedroom for the first time in months. No voices through the walls. No passive-aggressive door slamming. No one asking me to move my things. Just me, my soft sheets, and the silent thrill of power reclaimed. The next morning, Heather was already in the kitchen, pacing barefoot and visibly shaken, cradling her phone like it was a bomb about to go off. "Mason, we need to talk to her," she hissed not so quietly. I didn't even wait to be summoned. I walked in, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the head of the table. My chair, my mug, my house. Heather opened with a sweet, nervous laugh. "Mom, this is crazy, right? A misunderstanding, probably. You didn't really list the house?" I sipped, slowly. "Actually, I did. And someone already signed a purchase agreement." Mason's voice cracked across the room like a hammer. "You can't just kick us out. We've lived here for almost 2 years." I set the mug down, carefully. "You've squatted here. You've paid no rent. You've added nothing but clutter and insults. You're not tenants. You're freeloaders." He stepped forward, nostrils flaring. "You're being vindictive." I smiled, small, controlled. "No, Mason, I'm being lawful." They tried to argue, throwing words like family, disruption, and unfair treatment into the air like confetti. But I didn't flinch. I just stood, retrieved the red folder from the hallway credenza, and opened it in front of them like I was revealing sacred scripture. "Here's the deed. Here's the trust. Here's the letter from my attorney. And here," I tapped the calendar page folded behind the documents, "is the day you're expected to vacate." Heather's eyes welled with something, but I couldn't tell if it was rage or realization. "You're kicking out your own daughter?" she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm removing the people who made me feel like a stranger in my own home." She blinked. For once, Mason had nothing to add. I left them to stew in their stunned silence. I had errands to run, specifically, dropping off the antique armoire at a consignment shop and picking up paint samples for the new place I'd already put a deposit on. Yes, I was 2 steps ahead. That evening, I came home to find Mason had made a half-hearted attempt at cleaning the living room. Candles lit, music playing, a bottle of wine on the table. I stared at it all, then at him. I'm not interested in being seduced by candlelight, Mason. He looked offended. I was trying to make peace. No, you're trying to buy time. He didn't deny it. Later that night, I overheard them arguing behind their locked bedroom door. Mason was furious, Heather was crying, and someone threw a shoe. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I just turned on a nature documentary and let the sound of elephants trumpeting over savannas drown it all out. The next week was a slow burn. Heather tried everything: apologies, nostalgia, guilt trips. She dug out old birthday cards I'd written her as a child and left them on my nightstand. Mason switched tactics and got cold, barely speaking, occasionally slamming drawers and cupboards for theatrical effect. I didn't budge. Then one evening, they crossed a line. I came home from a walk to find my paintings, my original watercolors, boxed up and labeled garage. The master bedroom was locked again. Mason had claimed it accidentally shut, but we both knew better. I called Tom. The next morning, a formal eviction notice was delivered to the house. Heather screamed when she opened it. Mason threatened to sue. Go ahead, I said, not even looking up from my crossword. Just know the only thing you'll win is a reminder of how little power you actually have here. By week's end, the couple who toured the house submitted full payment. We closed fast. It was done. On the final day before the move-out deadline, I left early to avoid the spectacle. I sat by the lake, sketchbook in hand, drawing birds I couldn't name and clouds I didn't want to. Around noon, my phone lit up. A message from Heather. I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. No response, no reaction, because happiness wasn't the goal. Peace was. And that, I had finally found. The official move-out day arrived without confetti, without tears, at least not from me. I stayed away for most of it, wandering the local botanical garden with a tote bag and of lemon water, pretending I was just any other retiree out enjoying a Wednesday. But I wasn't just wandering, I was reclaiming. Every path I walked without checking my phone was a declaration. I'm not yours anymore. Not your cook, not your backup babysitter, not your emotional punching bag. When I got home that evening, the driveway was clear. No Mason's muddy SUV, no Heather's yoga mats draped across the porch railing like some bohemian signal flag. Just silence and jasmine-scented dusk. Inside, the air was different. Literally. They'd taken the air purifier. I chuckled at that. Of all the things to steal, the master bedroom had been stripped clean, save for a faint ring on the nightstand where someone had left a sweaty glass for too long. The guest room, my room for the past year, was still intact, but I didn't plan to sleep there anymore. I walked to the far end of the hallway and opened the door to the attic staircase. It creaked underfoot, groaning like an old friend being asked to dance again. Upstairs, in the dusty corners I used to avoid, I found treasures. A box of love letters from my husband, tied with blue ribbon. My daughter's childhood artwork. A photo of me at 26, standing in front of the house on the day we closed the deal. My hair was fuller then, but my expression was the same, stubborn pride. I brought the photo down and framed it on the hallway wall. Just beneath it, I placed a sticky note. She built this. The first night alone was quiet, but not empty. I danced in the kitchen while my pasta boiled. I lit a candle without wondering if someone would mock the scent. I painted for 3 uninterrupted hours. I slept in the middle of the bed, diagonally, like a queen with nowhere to be and no one to impress. But freedom has its echo. The next morning, I found myself reaching for an extra coffee mug, out of habit. I set the second one down, stared at it for a long moment, then slid it back into the cupboard. No one else was here. Not anymore. That day, I started packing, not because I needed to, but because I wanted a clean slate. I sorted my life into 3 categories: keep, donate, burn. You'd be surprised how many things fall into burn once you stop pretending you're obligated to carry dead weight. Mason's old hoodie he left in the laundry? Burn. The mug Heather gave me with "World's Best Grandma" on it after telling Lucas I was too dramatic? Burn. The ripped corner of the couch where I used to sit silently while they laughed in the other room? Not literal, but burn in spirit. Still, I wasn't bitter. I was relieved. On the 3rd night, I lit a fire in the backyard pit and tossed in the first stack, Printouts of text messages where I apologized for things I didn't do, for feelings I wasn't supposed to have. The flames danced. It felt like a ritual. Around midnight, I received a text from Mason. "You won't get away with this. We're filing something." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a screenshot, sent it to Tom with the caption, Exhibit A, entitled Man Who Lost. He replied with a thumbs up and already drafting cease and desist. God bless lawyers who enjoy their work. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at the door. Not from Mason or Heather. This one was official. A notice from the county confirming the deed, transfer, and sale completion. I read it like a love letter. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and called Rosa. "Is it done?" she asked, done and dusted. There was a pause, and then she said, "Then I'm coming over with cake." She arrived 20 minutes later, slippers on, curls pinned, holding a tray of lemon bars and a bottle of champagne. "To freedom," she said, lifting her glass. "To finally choosing myself," I replied. We toasted, we laughed, and somewhere between bites of cake and stories of our daughter's worst dates, I realized something. I wasn't just free of them. I was becoming me again. The first morning in my newly emptied house, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee and listening to the quiet. Not the awkward, heavy quiet I'd gotten used to with Heather and Mason, where every footstep felt like a warning, but the kind of quiet that lives in between fresh beginnings. The soft hum of the fridge, the creak of the old floorboard under the pantry, the birds outside holding a conversation I wasn't part of and didn't need to be. Peace, I realized, doesn't announce itself. It settles. By the end of that week, I had officially moved into a 2-bedroom condo on the edge of town. It was smaller, sure, and the balcony overlooked a parking lot rather than a garden, but it was mine. Entirely mine. Every shelf, every wall, every cushion picked out for no one's approval but my own. The first thing I hung up was that photo of 26-year-old me, the one with the windswept hair and wide, defiant eyes. Next to it, I pinned a sticky note, still her, just wiser. Then came the surprise. It was a Sunday, 3 weeks into my new chapter. I was blending frozen strawberries for a smoothie when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one besides Rosa even knew my new address. I opened the door cautiously, and there he was. Lucas, 8 years old, holding a brown paper bag and blinking up at me like he'd just been dropped off on a different planet. "Hi, Grandma G." My breath caught for the first time in months. He looked exactly the same, but also different. A little taller. His front teeth had grown in. He wore a t-shirt that said Future Astronaut and mismatched socks. "Lucas," I breathed. "How did you?" "Dad drove me," he said, motioning toward the parking lot. I looked past him. Sure enough, Daniel sat in the car, engine idling, avoiding eye contact like a teenager caught in the act. "Can I come in?" Lucas asked. I stepped aside without answering. He walked in, immediately placing the brown bag on the table like it was a sacred offering. "I brought lemon muffins," he said. "Mom doesn't like them, but you do." My throat tightened. I hadn't realized he'd ever noticed. He kicked off his shoes, flopped onto the couch like he'd done it 100 times, and started talking. About school, his new science project, how he hated virtual PE. I just listened. Every word felt like warm soup after a long, cold walk. Eventually, he paused and looked up. "Why don't you live in the big house anymore?" I sat beside him. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups need to move on when a place no longer feels like home." "Did Mommy make it not feel like home?" I didn't answer, but he nodded, like he already understood. He stayed for an hour. When Daniel finally got out of the car and knocked to retrieve him, he didn't come in, just stood awkwardly by the door. "I didn't know if you'd even open it," he said. "You shouldn't have assumed I wouldn't," I replied. Lucas ran over and hugged me, a real, tight, around-the-middle hug that kids don't fake. "Can I come again?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "Whenever you like." As they left, Daniel paused before walking down the steps. "I know I wasn't the one who said those things," he mumbled, "but I didn't stop them either. I'm sorry." I gave a slight nod. That's all he was getting. That night, I made tea, sat on my balcony, and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. And in that silence, I began painting again. Not dragons or forests like I used to, but still lifes. A bowl of peaches, a single tea kettle, a potted plant stretching toward a window. Simple things, beautiful, peaceful things. things no one would ever mock or move without asking. By the end of the week, I had a whole wall of new work. Rosa visited, eyes wide. "Grace," she said, "these are better than anything you did before." "That's because I'm not painting for anyone else anymore," I told her. "Just me." She smiled. "About damn time." We toasted again, this time with tea. And I realized finally that healing doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives like this: a quiet evening, a warm muffin, and a grandchild who still remembers how you take your coffee. It was a rainy Tuesday when the letter arrived. I had just come in from the balcony, where I'd been sipping chamomile tea and sketching a particularly moody-looking pigeon, when I saw the envelope sitting on my doormat. Thick, cream-colored, addressed in a handwriting I knew far too well. Heather's. For a moment, I debated tossing it straight into the recycling bin. No ceremony, no drama. Just let it dissolve into paper mulch like everything else they'd taken from me. But something about the weight of it made me pause. I sat at the table, unfolded it carefully, and began to read. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask you anything, and maybe you won't even read this, but I needed to try. I'm sorry for how everything happened, for not standing up when I should have, for letting someone else speak to you in ways I never should have allowed. I was so desperate to keep my life afloat that I didn't notice it was sinking yours. Lucas misses you. And if I'm being honest, I do too. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just maybe a second chance someday. Love, Heather." There were no tears. Not from me, anyway. I folded the letter and tucked it in the back of my journal. I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I called Rosa. "You'll never believe who finally wrote me," I said, stirring a sugar cube into my tea. Rosa gasped dramatically. "Tell me she used real paper. That alone deserves partial credit." "She did," I said, "and cursive, no less." Old school apology? Nice. We laughed about it, but later that night, as I curled under my favorite blanket, I kept thinking about one line in that letter. I was so desperate to keep my life afloat that I didn't notice it was sinking yours. That sentence sat with me like a stone in warm water, heavy but soft around the edges. People rarely notice when they're drowning others to stay afloat. They call it survival, when really, it's just selfishness in slow motion. But I'd survived too, and I'd done it without pulling anyone under. That was the difference. A few days later, I got a call from Lucas's school. He had drawn a picture of me for Grandparents' Day and insisted they send it to Grandma G ASAP. I picked it up from the office, a crayon sketch of me in my apron, holding a tray of cookies, with the words, "My grandma is strong and sweet and magic." I almost lost it right there in the parking lot. That night, I hung it on the fridge, centered, proud, like it was a Monet. Lucas visited again that weekend. He brought a deck of cards and challenged me to a game of war, which I won handily, then let him win the next 5. "You know you let me win, right?" he said, grinning. "Prove it," I winked. We baked snickerdoodles, spilled half the sugar, and danced in the kitchen like it was a Broadway stage. He told me about his new teacher, his favorite lunch, and how Mason doesn't really understand how Wi-Fi works. I didn't ask about Heather. I didn't need to. Kids always speak in clues. They just hope you're listening close enough. When Daniel came to pick him up, Lucas gave me an extra long hug and whispered, "You smell like cookies again." "Good," I whispered back. "That's how I want to be remembered." As they drove off, Daniel gave me a wave. Not overly friendly, but not cold either. Progress. That night, I sat on the couch, sketchpad in my lap, and thought about how far I'd come. From being called a servant to painting in peace. From being told to move out of my own room to owning every square inch of my space and my story. I glanced at Heather's letter again. Still no reply, but I was thinking about it. Maybe someday. Maybe. Autumn came quietly that year. One morning, I woke to find the trees outside my condo streaked with gold and crimson, like someone had painted them overnight while the world slept. I stepped out onto the balcony with my tea and just breathed. The kind of breath that reaches all the way to your toes. Life had found a rhythm again. 3 mornings a week, I attended a watercolor class at the community center. On Tuesdays, I met Rosa for lunch at our usual cafe, where the waitress knew our orders by heart and always added a mint sprig to my lemonade. Fridays were reserved for myself, long walks, longer naps, and evenings with music and brushes. I had even started selling a few of my paintings online, not because I needed the money, but because it felt good to have something I created hanging in someone else's home. To be seen again, not as a burden, but as a maker. Lucas still visited, though less frequently now that school had picked up. But every time he did, he ran in like the wind, dumping his backpack by the door and heading straight for the kitchen. "Cookies?" he'd ask. "Of course," I'd smile. "Baked this morning." One Saturday, as he munched on his fourth snickerdoodle, he looked up and asked, "Grandma, are you mad at Mommy forever?" I put down my knitting needles. "That's a big question," I said gently. He swung his legs beneath the chair. "She's been sad a lot. She doesn't say it, but I can tell." I stared at him. This little boy with his observant eyes and grown-up heart. "She made mistakes," I said finally. "Big ones. And she hurt me in ways she probably doesn't even understand. But being mad forever?" I reached over and tapped his nose. "That's a long time." He nodded like he understood. Before he left that day, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "Mom said you don't have to read it, but she wrote you again." After he left, I stared at the note for hours. This one wasn't on fancy stationery, just plain lined paper, scribbled in her fast, loopy handwriting. "I'm trying, Mom, not just to say sorry. To be sorry. Mason's gone. We're separating. It was my decision. I see things now I didn't let myself see before. You don't owe me anything, but I'll always owe you." I didn't cry, but I sat there a long while, just holding the letter like it might vanish if I let go. The next week, I sent her a card. It wasn't long, just a watercolor I'd painted of the lake near my condo and a note on the back. "Lucas is always welcome. Maybe you are too, one day. Not yet." Mom, I didn't hear back for a while, and that was okay. Some doors stay cracked open for a while before anyone dares step through. That Friday, Rosa and I went to an art fair in the next town over. I sold 3 paintings, bought a ridiculous sun hat, and ate the best peach cobbler I've ever tasted out of a paper bowl. "Grace," Rosa said as we sat on a bench watching kids run through the leaves, "you do realize you're kind of thriving, right?" I laughed. "I think I might be." That night, as I curled into bed, a notification buzzed on my phone. Heather had tagged me in an old photo, one of the two of us years ago at the beach. I was holding her as a toddler, her curls wild and wet, both of us smiling like the world had never gone sideways. The caption read, "I hope I get another chance to be held like this." I didn't respond. Not directly. But I let the tag stay. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive as a grand speech or a teary hug. Sometimes it starts with letting the photo stay up. The following weeks passed like soft pages of a well-loved book, quiet, steady, and comforting in their rhythm. The air grew crisper, and the scent of cinnamon and chimney smoke began to linger around my neighborhood like a familiar tune. Lucas still came over now and then, always with a story, a question, or a half-eaten granola bar tucked in his backpack. He started calling my condo our secret base, and I never corrected him. One afternoon, he arrived with a small plant in a paper bag. "It's a peace lily," he said. "We're learning about plants that clean the air. I thought your apartment might like it." I placed it by the window, where the morning sun would greet it each day. "Perfect," I said. "It'll keep us honest." Lucas laughed. "Plants don't lie." He had no idea how profound that was. That same week, I was painting when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Rosa had just left after bringing me a cinnamon bun the size of a steering wheel. I opened the door and froze. Heather. She stood there in jeans and a worn jacket, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple braid like she used to wear in college. In her hands, she clutched a familiar old Tupperware container, the red-lidded one we used to keep peanut brittle in every December. She looked up at me, eyes unsure but hopeful. "I brought something." I stepped aside, wordlessly. She entered like someone remembering how to be small again. We sat at the kitchen table. She opened the lid to reveal snickerdoodles, my recipe clearly, though hers were a little misshapen. "I had to call Rosa for the instructions," she admitted with a faint smile. I took one, bit into it. Slightly overbaked, but still sweet. "Not bad," I said. She nodded, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for years. We sat in silence for a bit, sipping tea. Then, softly, she began. "I stayed with Mason longer than I should have. Partly because I was scared, partly because I thought I had to prove something, but mostly because I didn't know how to admit I was wrong." I let her speak. not because she deserved it, but because I did. I think about what I let happen in that house, how I let someone treat you like an accessory, like background noise. And I hate it. I hate that I let my fear of failure become more important than your dignity. I finally spoke. Fear makes fools of all of us. She looked down. I'm trying to be better. I see that, I said, but I also need time. Heather wiped at her eyes, then reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. I found this when I was packing, she said. It was in the attic. Thought you might want it. I unwrapped it slowly. It was the photo of me at 26, the one I'd already made a copy of, but this was the original. The edges curled, a small tear at the bottom. My face, wind-blown and defiant. She built this, Heather whispered, reading the faded sticky note I had once written. I placed the photo beside the peace lily. She still is, I said. Heather smiled, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who used to tug on my hand and call me Mommy with a lisp. Before she left, we stood awkwardly at the door. She hesitated, then leaned in and hugged me. Not a tight one. Not a sobbing apology. Just a simple, honest hug. I held her for a beat longer than I expected. After she left, I sat on the balcony and stared up at the sky. A breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it a memory of laughter, arguments, slammed doors, and now something new. Forgiveness. Maybe not fully formed, but beginning. The peace lily by the window glowed in the amber light, and for the first time in a long time, I whispered aloud, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the universe. A few weeks later, I found myself walking through the farmer's market with a basket of pears and no real agenda. The air had taken on that early winter bite, sharp, crisp, but not yet cruel. It smelled like pine cones and caramel, and everywhere I turned, people were bundled up in coats and scarves, smiling into steaming cups. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. Not to strangers, and more importantly, not to myself. That Saturday evening, Rosa came over with a bottle of mulled wine and a small stack of Christmas cards she'd been hoarding since last year. She said it was time we reclaimed the tradition, which mostly meant messy glitter and questionable calligraphy. Send one to Heather, she nudged me. I hesitated. Then I picked the one with the quiet snow-covered cabin and wrote, "One step at a time. You're still my daughter. Mom." No promises, no resets, just acknowledgement. A few days later, I received a card in return. "I'm bringing cookies for Christmas. Lucas insists on helping. We'll see you at noon." Heather, I smiled, then added lemon tea and extra sprinkles to my grocery list. On Christmas morning, they arrived, Heather and Lucas, carrying a tin of cookies that were still too crunchy, but charmingly iced. Lucas wore a Santa hat 3 sizes too big, and Heather brought me a poinsettia plant and a nervous half smile. "Lucas did most of the decorating," she said, gesturing to the lopsided trees on the sugar cookies. "They're perfect," I replied. "We had cocoa, we played cards, we didn't talk about the past, and that was the gift." That afternoon, after they left, I curled into my chair with a blanket, looking around the living room at the evidence of something I never thought would return. Softness, connection, even love. Not the kind of love that shouts or insists, the kind that comes back humbly, barefoot, and new. Later that night, Rosa texted, "How was it? Scale of 1 to Lifetime holiday movie?" I replied, "Somewhere between awkward car ride and tearful reunion, but better than expected." That night, I climbed into bed, my window crack just slightly open, letting in the hush of winter air. The peace lily stood watch by the sill, its white bloom still unfolding. I looked at the ceiling and whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" Not to anyone, just to myself. And then I slept, deeply, finally, warm in my own home, in my own story, under the weight of nothing but a quilt and the quiet satisfaction of having chosen peace over pride. As you rest your head tonight, let this story soften the edges of your day. Maybe you saw a bit of yourself in Grace, the one who gave again, and only later realized how much had been taken. Or maybe you've stood on the other side, fumbling for forgiveness in the shadows of your own mistakes. Either way, what matters most is what Grace finally claimed, her peace. Not revenge, not dominance, not a dramatic confrontation, just stillness, stability, self-respect. She learned what many of us take a lifetime to understand, that walking away doesn't mean you've given up. Sometimes it means you finally remembered who you are. So tonight, whether you're sipping tea in silence, or staring up at the ceiling trying to make sense of something heavy, let this be your permission to choose yourself. Let go of what weighs you down. Reclaim your space. Take up room without apology. Because you too are allowed to be the main character in your own home, your own life, your own peace. Now, turn off the lights, let the air settle around you like a soft blanket, and close your eyes. You're safe here, you're free here, and you are not a servant. You are the architect of your peace,